All right, so let's add a couple extra tests, one for the initial count and one for the step option that is provided by this useCounter component. We have that initial count and that step. So I'm going to copy and paste this. And let's see, we had the titles given to us from that extra credit. Thank you, Hannah100. And we'll come over here. We've got customization of the initial count. So here I'll say my counter sets the initial count to 3. That sounds good. And so then our initial count will be 3. When we increment, it'll be 4. And then it'll go back to 3. If we save that, our test is passing. Sweet. And then we've got this customization of the step. So we'll do basically the same thing here, except this is going to be customization of the step. We'll set that step to 2. So we'll start out at 0. We'll go to 2 and go back to 0. Save that. Our test is green. Super happy about that. But once we start doing this kind of thing, then we've got some duplication here that I'm not a super duper huge fan of. So what I'm going to do is make a function here called setup. And this is going to take an object called initial props. And we'll default that to an empty object there. And then I'm just going to take this stuff and move it up. And we can return the result. And we'll take that initial props and pass that to our useCounter. And we'll also want to render that test component in here. So all we really care about is that result. Sweet. So then we'll get our result from setup, call that, and kablooey. Oh no, what in the world is going on here? Okay, so we've got a result count is 0, then we increment, and then a result count is still 0. What gives, yo? Like, what's going on here? Well, it just so happens, due to referential equality, right here, we actually set the object to what we get back from useCounter, and then we return that object. But when we call this increment, we actually trigger a re-render of this test component function. We reassign the result to a new object, but just because we're reassigning this variable doesn't mean that we're reassigning this variable. So these are two different bindings to the same object at first, and then the first binding here gets reassigned to a new object, and this binding remains at the old object. So what we need to do is have some binding that's shared to a single object that then is continuously updated. So what we're going to do is we're going to say const result equals an object, and then we'll say result.current equals this useCounter, so we're no longer reassigning that variable. We return that result, and then instead of result.count and so on and so forth, we'll say result.current. And so now we have a reference to the exact same object, which simply gets reassigned to whatever useCounter returns. So if we save that, now we've got a passing test, and we can do the same thing for all of these. So this can be result equals setup, and then for this one, we pass the initial props to have that initial count of 3. And then instead of result dot for all of these, this will be result.current dot. And that one's passing. Sweet. And now we've got our result equals setup with initial props and a step of 2. And then all of these are going to be result.current. Save that, and we need to spell things correctly. This isn't state, this is going to be step. There we go. Sweet. So now we've been able to abstract out this setup function, but we had to deal with some little hiccups here to deal with that variable binding, because we can't reassign a variable here and expect this binding to update to the same object that we're setting in here. And so therefore, we create a single object, return that object, and then update a property on that object.